Hi, I'm Jake Novak, and welcome to this very special edition of The Analysts with Jake Novak, our post-debate edition. And of course, I must begin with my mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I really did not think that the Biden campaign and his handlers would allow this debate to go on. I came up with a number of scenarios and maybe even plausible excuses for them to cancel, but they did go ahead and do it. But in my defense, I think if you saw that debate Thursday night, you know that I was right, at least in the suggestion that they shouldn't have done it. Really, honestly, it would have been better, as much as it would have been bad to cancel at the last minute. I think it would have been better, and I'm saying this in all honesty, I think it would have been better if the Biden campaign had canceled that debate because the president's performance was so bad. Now, for those of you who saw it and don't think it was completely bad the whole time, a couple of things to acknowledge. First of all, the agreement. Who says there's too much partisanship and everyone is too bitter in America? I haven't seen partisan agreement about something as important as this in a really long time. There is universal agreement, or at least such a strong predominant agreement, that Joe Biden did very badly in the debate last night, that it was harmful to his campaign. You rarely see that out of a debate. Most debates are basically a stalemate. People spin it any way they want to spin it. There are very few memorable things about any individual debate. But last night provided a universal condemnation of the strength of Joe Biden's performance. So let's just not gloss over that. Let's remember that that's rare, and that is what happened. Secondly, there's something about television, and this is true whether you're producing TV news like I did for 30 years, or even a dramatic television series, a sitcom, something like that. The audience, we found this, and I don't know if this is a psychological thing or if it's just something about television. The audience will forgive a lot of mistakes in the middle of a presentation, in the middle of a show, in the middle of a reporter's live shot on the scene somewhere. As long as he or she or the ensemble starts cleanly and strongly and ends strongly. And for Joe Biden, it really was a weak start, and it was a terribly weak ending. It wasn't his worst couple of minutes, the closing statement, but it was close. And remember, and we'll talk about this more with my next guest a little bit, remember, that closing statement was something that he could have been practicing for weeks and weeks and weeks and months. There's nothing about the closing statement that had to refer to anything that happened live on that stage in the previous 88 minutes. And yet he still stumbled through that. So again, it's not only an overall bad performance, but a bad performance at the worst moments of a particular debate. Now, this is The Analysts. We're not here to bash candidates for their policies or to talk about who you should vote for. But we are here to talk about what better strategies are. Now, again, all joking aside, I think it might have been a better strategy if during the preparations for this debate, the Biden team saw a Joe Biden like we saw last night, or Thursday night, depending on when you're watching this. They should have canceled the debate. That's bad political consulting, bad advice. They should have come up with some reason. There are a lot of excuses out there that the news media, at least half the news media, would have carried the water for. Could have been something about Israel. It could have been something about the Russians hacking something. It could have been a million things. So they really listen, it would have hurt. It would not have been a net positive had they canceled the debate, especially if it had been less than a week out. But certainly a week or 2 weeks before, had they canceled it, as much as that would have done some damage to them, it would not have been as damaging as that performance Thursday night. And that's what a good political consultant has to do, among many other jobs. One of the most important jobs is knowing what is the worst of the two scenarios, even if you have two bad scenarios. The lesser of two evils is not just a choice that we voters have to deal with every time we go into the voting booth. It's something that political consultants have to deal with and make the right choice on every single day, pretty much. And they made the wrong choice here. So that's part one. Part two, they obviously flooded Joe Biden with a bunch of different messages and a bunch of different pointers. And that's a bad idea with someone who's a little bit brain addled, even if he doesn't have the level of cognitive problems that Joe Biden seems to have. Joe Biden did best in the debate when basically, and as nasty as it was, when basically he called Donald Trump a liar, when basically he insulted him. Now, as an American, as someone who cares about the country, I didn't want to see Joe Biden do that for 90 minutes. But if I were a political consultant, I would basically tell him, do that for 90 minutes. People will like that. At least your base will like that. They'll feel a little bit emboldened. At least you have that. And we know that you can deliver those lines coherently. So I think that's one other thing I would have done. And finally, I think it was also just a terrible, terrible mistake for Joe Biden to come out there and not have the live audience. the live audience that we see at rallies, as much as sometimes that can be a little bit of a distraction to some people, that does seem to invigorate Joe Biden a little bit. And agreeing to not have a live audience, which I think was detrimental to both candidates and detrimental to the whole country, was really a huge mistake on behalf of his political consultants. But we'll get more and more into that. Now, Donald Trump, in my opinion, not a perfect performance from Donald Trump. Just like I really think Joe Biden should have stayed away from a lot of the policy discussions, a lot of the numbers, a lot of the facts and figures, and just kind of stick with a sloganeering. Donald Trump also talked a lot about individual policies. He was a lot better at the sloganeering than Joe Biden was. But very often, his strengths were when he was responding like a normal person would to something that Joe Biden just said. At one point in the debate, Donald Trump said, I don't know what he just said, and I don't think he does either. Donald Trump should have said that several times during the debate. Just be a regular guy standing next to someone who looks like he's melting down. Let him melt down and provide an occasional short color commentary about it. Go on about how your record is stronger. Basically say, you're looking at this performance right now. You know that I'm more sharp and I'm more ready for this job. You can't let this guy continue to go on. Let me take the reins now. And again, he did do that sometimes. It's not like he didn't do that at all. But I think he should have done it more and left the individual talk about the best economy and this number and that percent and that number, and just leave that alone a little bit, because people and the public, I don't think the voting public thinks too much about that. Overall, though, again, the American people saw a debate where we really didn't get a lot of information. The overwhelming theme of the debate, other than Joe Biden's cognitive issues, was that both candidates basically called each other liars the entire time. And that really kind of descended into a point where we really weren't getting anywhere. I'll talk a little bit later with Peter Tedeschi, who's a 30-year veteran at CNN. He's now doing other work right now. But we're going to talk a lot about CNN's performance, because in addition to the two candidates who were on the spot last night, Thursday night, so was the mainstream news media, so was the regime news media, especially, of course, CNN. This was their broadcast. And we're going to talk about how that plays a role, and how, if you are looking at messaging, if you are going to be running for president or running for any elected office in the next few years, it's important to understand in an analysts kind of way, we're going to look at the way the regime news media acts and acted in that debate, because there's a lot to talk about. But when we come back, we're going to be joined by communications expert Michael Kingsley. He's been a guest on the show before, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of this particular debate. Again, not the policy issues, not the partisanship, but the messaging, and talk about the highs and lows, and there were a lot of lows, but the highs and lows of this debate, and what political consultants are doing right, not much, and wrong, a lot, when it comes to these kinds of debates. So stick with us. We'll be right back with Michael Kingsley on The Analysts.
What does it mean to be a leader?
It's taking my first solo flight.
At the University of North Dakota, we lead our own way.
Hi, I'm Jake Novak, and welcome back to The Analysts. And I'm also welcoming back a guest from our very first program, Michael Kingsley, a communications expert, somebody who works with CEOs, somebody who works with people who have to speak either in public or in corporate settings. And that's where we're going to go. Now, listen, Michael knows a lot about political history and American political history, but we're going to lean on his expertise as far as a communications expert. And really, before I get into any specific questions, Michael, as someone who deals with communications, what was your overall impression of the performance in the debate Thursday night with Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Thanks, Jake. And I'm back with the commander-in-chief hat just for you and your audience. Wow. I mean, first of all, wow. And anybody you talk to, their first impression is, wow, what just happened? I think high level, I think this was really a disaster for President Biden and for his comms team. We'll talk about that a little bit. I think President Trump, former President Trump, could have done a lot of additional things to help himself that he didn't do. But at the same time, I think he was more controlled. And of the 3 series of debates he's done, I think this was him at his best, for better or for worse. I think you have to analyze it from the point of view of what they were trying to accomplish. What did they think they were doing? Why were they going into this? This is what I ask the people I'm training or the people I'm creating a media strategy for. Why do you want to do this? Is it right for you to go to the press? And if you go to the press, which outlets? Is it right for you to go to events and be speaking publicly or not? And very importantly, I'll talk about it a little bit more later, is who is your spokesperson? Who should you be leaning on to deliver your message? And I think you would get very mixed answers from the Biden team as to what they were trying to accomplish there. I think for the Trump team, is probably a little more clear to them.
You know, Michael, I wrote an editorial that was published in Newsweek the day of the debate, the morning of the debate, where I argued the debate would matter. I mean, that was the narrative that Newsweek was pushing, and they asked me to write a counterpiece, and they were very nice to publish it. And I said, no, the debate will matter, not because it's going to change votes. The idea that somebody who either hasn't decided yet or is voting for the other guy is going to change their mind at any debate, especially last night's debate, I think is wrong. I think it's the wrong way to look at debates. I think it's all about how enthusiastic the voters are going to be. You have two candidates who are not very popular, two candidates who are extremely familiar to the American public, for better or for worse. And so I thought that to answer your question about what are you looking to do, I thought that the realistic thing that either candidate, any candidate could want to do, especially last night in the debate Thursday night, was, hey, get your people a little bit more enthusiastic. The people who are going to vote for you anyway, but aren't going to go to the family gathering and say, I'm voting for Joe, I'm voting for Trump. The person who may start posting on social media a little bit more, or the person who's just afraid to do that now, get them to want to do that, so that vote, which is in the unlikely category and you can't really count on it, becomes into the more likely candidate and category, and then maybe they will help just change somebody's mind. So do you think any of that would, so what do you think from that point of view? Yeah. First of all, do you agree with that premise? And do you think either one of them got that sort of that excuse to now come out of the closet as a Biden or a Trump voter?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of it, but I want to take it in a slightly different direction from that, which is what you're bringing to mind is that these debates and a lot of our political process and the way politics is covered in the press have been meta for a long time. No one, virtually no one of the tens of millions of people who watch this debate sat down saying, I want to see what President Biden and President Trump have to say about Ukraine and about Israel and about inflation, so that I can make a decision and analyze which of them has the better points of view. No one was coming to this to see what their policy is. Everybody comes in fully informed to see if Joe Biden is able to give a coherent speech and to see if Donald Trump is going to act presidential or if he's going to blow it all up. And that goes to what you were saying about the enthusiasm, is making sure that, some of it's fan service, right? Giving the people what they want and getting them jazzed up to go out there. But yeah, you have to be trying to engage with your audience, figure out who your audience is. And sometimes there's multiple audiences, and what you're trying to target them with. And I think what you point out probably would be a best use of their time, right? Trying to deputize your strongest or potentially strongest advocates and getting them out there to pick up the phone, to donate, to make sure they crawl over broken glass to vote for you. But I don't think the comms teams probably had it quite as clear as that, even though I think you're right that should have been a primary goal.
Michael, it doesn't seem like Biden's comms team gave him enough tools and tricks to work with. One of the things that I see, whether it's a kid giving his bat mitzvah speech or her bar mitzvah speech, or all the way up to someone to the top level, one of the tricks that I like to tell people is get the audience on your side right away. Now, people often think that's you can do that with a joke. Yeah. With younger speakers, I often tell them, let them know in a non-frightening way that you're a little nervous. Just let them know. Say a joke about it, and that way half the audience is on your side, if not all. And that thing that you're doing to yourself, thinking you have to hide the way that you're feeling, is now gone, and you've also given yourself a release. Yeah. And the reason why I'm saying this is because Joe Biden was so weak right off the bat. One of the things that I've seen in so many debates is, instead of just quickly answering the first question, they say something along the lines of, well, I'm going to answer your question, Jake. I'm going to answer your question, Dana. But first, let me thank you for having this event. Yeah. I'm tired. I've been running across the country a lot and been running the country lately, but I'm still glad to be here. I hope I do a good job. And he didn't do any of those things. Right. How could you be a political consultant in 2024 and not give a guy a tool like that? Do you give tools like that?
Right. Of course. And you want there's a couple of things to unpack in what you said. Number one, the things when this comes into play when I'm training somebody to work on a panel, for example, to speak on a panel, things that you can control are your opening and your closing. In a job interview, right? The first question in every job interview is tell me about yourself. The last question is, did we forget anything? Was there any questions you have for us? And those are where you can really script it out. And I don't have the transcript in front of me, but the closing for the two of them were not great either. Trump did a little bit better than Biden. And I've heard people remark on this too, that Biden did not close well. He had something very specific instead of going big picture and so on. But the opening obviously is that where, the way the moderators asked the questions, this was absolutely one of those debates where you could say, and they did many times, hang on, I'll get to that, but let me say this. Yeah. And yeah, Biden, well, first of all, Biden came out with that raspy voice. He came out talking very quickly and so on. So there were a lot of, and you and your audience both know about first impressions, right? That you get that one chance to make the first impression. Here, pull back the curtain. What did I do at the beginning? I made the joke about my hat, even though you had asked me a question, and then I came back to it. The other tip and trick that you really want to arm people with is stories. And on Saturday Night Live, when they make fun of presidential debates, they make fun of the stories. Daryl Hammond playing Al Gore, very, very famous, telling the story of this poor destitute woman who had all these diseases and owed millions of dollars from health insurance and so on. They really didn't tell stories very well at all. That was a real missed opportunity for Donald Trump. He referenced he said there were these young girls and so on, but he didn't set it up. He didn't tell names. He didn't say, I first found out about this when whatever. And Biden did the same thing. They had some facts and figures. You can dispute whether they were accurate, but very few stories, which are what people connect with.
Right. Before you came on with the show, I made that same exact point. It's true whether you're talking about a television live shot for a reporter or even a sitcom. The audience will really excuse and accept a lot, but you got to come in cleanly and you got to go out cleanly. And there's absolutely no excuse for him to have gone out as really dirty as he did. It was just really, he stumbled all over a closing statement that he could have had prepared months ago. So I talked about that already, and you agree with that. Talking about now,
and I think, Jake, I think some of that is over preparation. I think he was holed up in Camp David for 5 days, 6 days. I've heard different accounts, and I think they probably gave him too much. I heard something that there were 16 people prepping him. That's too much. I don't care that he's 81 years old. That's too much to give him to keep track of. You arm a speaker with 2 or 3 key talking points to return to. Now, they should know every variation of it, but they should have in their head, particularly when they're not allowed to bring notes with them, these key 3 things. I'm up for the job. We're working on inflation. We're working with our allies around the world. And then you hit those variations on those 3 points over and over. He was trying to juggle a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question based on your understanding of how people take good and bad communications. I said at the top of the show, who says there's no partisan agreement in this country? I'm really surprised by the strong partisan agreement that Joe Biden did poorly Thursday night. It's really not even a question. So that's kind of interesting. But so let's take the premise that Biden was the loser. You don't have to agree that Trump's the winner. But let's take the premise that Biden is the big loser. Is there somebody else or another entity in American politics, another entity in the American world, or in the wider world in general, who was also a loser? I mean, other than these political consultants who failed at preparing him. I mean, is there someone else who may have lost last night? I mean, beyond, the American public deserves better. I mean, is there somebody else who may have been, who saw that and realized they're on the wrong side of something?
That's a tough question. So you want me to identify a specific person or a specific group of people who lost by Biden?
Yeah, I would say I think it was those traditional Democrats, the ones who are pushing back on the progressives, the ones who want to make it clear that they're the ones who are the adults in the room, that the far left progressives, are not good for the party.
Yeah.
But maybe they won. I don't know, but it's up to you to, that's one
So
example.
what you're talking about is targeting who's the target audience, I think, of
Yeah.
this, and they lost because they were not catered to, or they lost, where the speakers lost the opportunity to connect with them. And this is something I really wanted to talk about, which is you're never going in with a clean slate, particularly with guys who are so well known like this. A 3.5-year track record for Biden, 4-year track record for Trump. Everybody watching knows the polling numbers, knows how Biden has performed, knows what Trump did as president, knows who they are. So you're not starting with a blank slate, and you have to figure out who you're going to target based on what they know. And the polling tells Biden's team that they are not as shored up in their base as President Trump's team has. President Trump, there's polls that something like 92% of Republicans are behind him. And Biden, I don't know, do you know the number? It's like 75 or 80% or something like that. That's why Trump feels he has all the red states locked down. He's campaigning in Virginia. Biden is going to black churches in Philadelphia, trying to shore up his base a little bit more. So I think Biden they were probably of two minds going into this, that we need to kind of shore up our base a little bit, but we want to get those the Reagan Democrats, the blue collar folks who haven't gone fully to the Republicans yet, and the Democrats could get union types and so on. I don't think they had a good answer. And I think, not to say everybody lost, like you said, but I think the specific groups who could have been targeted, I think definitely lost out, because I don't think they had that focus. I think it's more of trying to be all things to everyone and shore him up generally.
All right. Last question for Michael Kingsley. If you have a corporate CEO, an executive like that in your office right now, and they say to you, I'd like to watch that debate Thursday night and learn from it, what would you tell them?
I would say the biggest mistake that happened with that debate I think it's more interesting to talk about Biden than Trump, because I think Trump was fine. I mean, it was pretty much what your impression of Donald Trump before is exactly the same afterwards. I don't think he moved the needle one way or the other. Maybe he reminded a few folks that he's the same guy he's always been, for better or for worse. I think the single big mistake was doing the debate at all. I think in hindsight, Biden's team should not have done this debate. They should have said something like, I'm sorry, I will not demean the presidency by appearing on the same stage as a convicted felon. And they should have made that decision previously. Now, you asked me in terms of a CEO, very difficult for people who work for a CEO, easier for outside consultants sometimes to push back against the CEO and say, you know what, maybe you're not the right spokesperson for this. And I think the ground was seeded over 3.5 years. The Biden team does not have any other good spokespeople to go to. Janet Yellen is not a household name as Treasury Secretary. She is not out there all the time. I think they flirted with Pete Buttigieg being that early on. They tried to get him on all the Sunday shows and so on. What that would allow Biden to do, and his spokespeople to do, is say, yeah, he's lost a step in public speaking. He's in his 80s. He is not out there giving the granular granular details. But founders of companies who are in their 80s don't give the granular details. CEOs who are in their 80s don't give the granular details. They're the conductor conducting an orchestra. And you should see Biden in a cabinet meeting where he's collaborative. He doesn't speak a lot. He calls on the Secretary of the Treasury. He calls on the Secretary of State, and they lead it. He has trust in his team. And you've seen this person at the podium. You've seen this person at the podium. We don't need to do a debate. You know what he does. You've seen the success in our track record. And instead, there was a little bit of a Hail Mary here. They called for this. They called for it to be early. And I think I think they kind of set a trap for themselves and fell into it.
Thank you, Michael Kingsley, communications expert. Remember, this expertise is available to you, America, if you want to actually get your communications in order. I don't suggest ChatGPT if you need to make an important speech.
Right.
You will screw up. I gave a very important speech earlier this week, and I talked about ChatGPT, but I didn't use it, and it was probably the most popular part of the speech. So that's an important thing right there. remember, folks, there were three entities that were really on trial last night, or at the Thursday night debate: Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and CNN. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by somebody who spent decades at CNN, from the earliest days of CNN, just about the earliest days. We're going to talk about CNN's performance, what that teaches us if you want to be someone who's a strong candidate, and what they did right and wrong. I'll be right back with that. Stay with us here on The Analysts.
Watch 13 Wham News anywhere on any device with Stir. Download the Stir app and choose Rochester. You get local news and more than 20 other TV channels. And the best part? It's free. Go to your app store and download Stir today.
Hi, welcome back to The Analysts with Jake Novak. And as I said before, there were actually three entities that were very much in the spotlight or being tested at the debate Thursday night. Of course, President Joe Biden, of course, President Donald Trump, but also CNN, and to a wider degree, the entire mainstream news media or regime news media or just news media, whatever you want to call it. Now, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert right here at the end. I actually think CNN's performance during the evening was pretty good. There's a couple of things I want to point out just quickly about that. First of all, the fact that they put the candidates on a two-shot during most of the debate, that's when you see both candidates, even though only one is talking. I think that went a long way to assuage a lot of the fears I had about the fact that there was no live audience and no unedited live feed provided. So I give CNN a lot of credit for that. I'm sure a lot of the people from both campaigns had some problems with it, considering both of them at certain points when they weren't talking didn't look so great. But still, that was great. I'm glad they did it. I think that was real integrity on their part. I thought the questions in general were pretty good. They weren't as self-serving as you've seen in some other debates where the moderators bring up some real minutia just to show that they did some research and to make themselves look smart. Of course, they had some questions like that where they did something like that, but not too much and not too much in the weeds. I believed everything that Dana Bash and Jay Tapper that said. They actually kind of knew what they were saying. I mean, I don't think they're great scholars by any stretch, but I don't think that they were just reading stuff that they didn't understand. So I give them credit for that. And I think I give them credit for realizing that they had a newsworthy event. I mean, listen, these news media outlets, if they decide to just have self-interest and decide to go for ratings instead of parroting a regime, or in the case of a Fox, parroting a right-wing agenda, they would actually probably make more money, CNN especially. And I give them credit for actually going with a breaking news story and making it clear that there was news broken just on their own network, just moments before, and spending the 2 or 3 hours after the debate really going all in on all of that. But my opinion isn't as important because I only worked at CNN for 7 years. The man who's going to join us now, worked there for decades, was one of the very early employees of CNN, not an original CNN, but darn close. And of course, he's doing some other stuff right now. But my next guest is Peter Tedeschi. He was an executive producer at CNN for a long time, worked with Larry King, was also an executive at CNN. And Peter, I mean, you heard what I had to say. What do you think? I mean, do you think that, do you give them a similar report card as I do?
Yes, thank you, first of all, for having me. And I want to make one clarification. You said I was not there at the beginning. I did work with the originals, but I wasn't that early. I'm not that old, okay? But all the originals were still there when I got there. So yeah. I did work with them all. And I worked in Washington for a long time. And one of the things I did do was I oversaw breaking news coverage out of Washington for a long time, or live event coverage, so this would have fallen into that world. So let me just start off by saying, before I answer your question on being that guest who's not answering your question right off the bat, I don't work for CNN anymore. And CNN has a regime change about every 5 minutes lately. So I worked there a few regime changes ago. So I have no special insight into what their editorial meetings, what they said in their editorial meetings, how they chose to frame things or anything like that. I watched it like any other viewer. The TV producer may have to fix my light. I watched it like any other viewer, and I have maybe some insight into what happens beyond that. So I agree generally with your assessment. I think they did a good job. Nothing's ever perfect, and this wasn't perfect, but I think generally speaking, they did not inject themselves, and I'm using they meaning Dana and Jake, but also the network did not inject itself into becoming part of the story. You felt very much like they were covering a story, and I thought that was very refreshing.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. So again, they decided to go with the two-shot. And from what I understand, the Biden campaign's upset about that because there were just a lot of expressions on the face of Joe Biden during the course of the debate that they're not happy with. But what's the alternative? I mean, they have to see, you have to give people a chance to feel like they're in the room. I mean, would you have made a different decision? Would you have not gone on a two-shot?
No. I think the split screen was a good idea because you want to see how people react to things. Biden made a classic mistake, and that is he had his mouth open. Which when you sometimes I work with people in like live events too, in live theater and in person kind of stuff. And often you encourage people in that situation to have your lips slightly parted because it looks like you're engaged about to say something. But on television, it looks terrible. It looks absolutely terrible. And that's a simple fix. That's a simple fix that somebody should have told them, don't do that. It's that simple. It also adds to the look of the sort of, where am I feeling? And without getting into, we're talking about CNN right now, without getting to Biden personally, I'm not a doctor. I do not think he has dementia. I've been close to people who have had dementia, and he does not have that look of someone like that. He certainly isn't a good speaker, and that was always that way. I also covered The Hill at one point earlier in my career when he was a senator, and he kind of talked that way sometimes when he was decades younger than he is now. So I don't want to get into making a medical diagnosis here because I've seen him be that. I've personally seen him be that way, maybe not quite to that extent, when he was significantly younger. But CNN using the split screen allowed the viewer to make their own decision rather than make the decision for them. And I think that was important. And also you saw Trump, doing his kind of thing like that too. And I'm sure his camp wasn't thrilled with that, but that's what he did. And that's what you got to see. And you're very much correct. If this were a whistle stop campaign on the back of a train car 100 years ago, all you have is your eyes to see the candidates. So if you don't want us to see your candidate, there's a problem there. So as a news media person, I would be like, yeah, we got to see the candidates.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. You said something earlier about CNN and Dana Bash and Jake Tapper not inserting themselves into things. And, I think about people like Candy Crowley and stuff like that who really over-inserted themselves. I think Gwen Ifill did it too at one point. And, there were a lot of opportunities for them to do that, not just to fact check them and be nudniks in that way, but there were a number of things that President Biden said, and in some cases Donald Trump as President Trump too, that were a little bit different from what we were hearing. I think one of the big losers of the debate Thursday night was Hamas and the pro-Hamas people. Joe Biden said nothing bad about Israel and nothing nice about the Gazan civilians. He certainly had nothing nice to say about Hamas, and he put it all on them. And if I had been Jake Tapper, it would have been hard for me to resist saying, Mr. President, but you said that in the past that Israel has made all these terrible mistakes. Are you really saying it's just Hamas's fault that this war goes on? So I give him credit for not doing that. But I wonder
he also, if I may interrupt,
yeah,
he also didn't talk about Jamal Bowman losing his primary.
Yeah.
He stayed out of all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was, there was some restraint there. Now, whether the moderators of the future debates, if we do have these next two debates, are as restrained, I don't know. There may be huge pressure. I wonder if you agree. Do you think there'll be huge pressure? I guess CBS gets the next one, or ABC. Will there be huge pressure on their moderators to step in a little bit more from the left and say, hey, these guys let Trump get away with stuff? We've seen this in the past where, for example, CNN in 2015 and early 2016, Donald Trump was a regular phone-in guest. And I know that for a fact, even though we were both long gone from CNN at that point, there were people on staff at CNN who really felt angry that he was given such a platform. And that is one of the reasons why they whipsawed so viciously against him towards the end of 2016 and all that. Do you think there'll be that kind of pressure on ABC next time?
Well, I wasn't that long gone by then, but yeah. I think there'll be some pressure. It's hard for me to really gauge how much there'll be, but I don't think that's an entirely bad thing because I think there does have to be a balance struck as a journalist, right? So, for example, on one level, I think it was good that Dana and Jake did not interrupt or did not do any fact checking, so that let the candidates do their work for themselves. On one level, I agree with that. On another level, there was a point where President Biden said something like to Trump, something about would you pull out of NATO? He asked him point blank. And Trump actually began to answer the question, which surprised me. And Jake Tapper cut him off because it was time to move on to the next thing. And that's a case where I think I would have tried to use a little journalistic thought. And I don't want to say thought because that I'm not putting Jake down, but I just mean a moment. Yeah. And, when you're live, I've done a lot of live television in my life. When you're live, it's sometimes difficult to do that. I mean, I give him credit, but that's an answer I really would like to have gotten from Trump. And that was a moment where I wish the moderators had used a little producing from the anchor desk kind of moment to go, well, wait a minute. That's a question that we want to hear an answer to. There were other times where there were just falsehoods spoken, where I felt like, as a journalist, I'd like to jump in here and go, whoa, that's wrong. But then, to contradict myself, you run the risk of looking like you're ganging up on one candidate or the other. So, excuse me, I understand the desire for this debate not to do that at all. I almost wish the same team were doing the next debate, because then I would be like, maybe for the second one, you jump in anytime you hear a falsehood or you do a fact check right on the spot, something like that. It's going to be very difficult for a completely different team to sort of make this like part two. It's going to be its own separate entity now, if it happens, of course.
Yeah, let me pivot now to their post-game show and their post-game analysis, which I thought was very interesting. You heard me say at the top of the segment, CNN decided to go with full breaking news mode, not breaking news debate wraps up, that stupid banner people put after the live shot's over. Instead, it was breaking news sources say that, I'm paraphrasing it, it's sources that those Democrats are in panic mode over Biden's performance. And they really went all in on it. Like this is, they weren't just saying, well, this is just one source and we'll see what other people say. They went right into a real story, which made it one of those rare, usually, people like to turn the TV off after the debate's over. It made you really want to stay and watch because they were going all in on it. And I know MSNBC and Fox were doing the same thing, but it was significant that CNN but there's one thing that gives me a little bit of an itch in the back of my head, and I wonder if the same thing with you. It seemed a little like they were too prepared for that. Is it possible that they had this ready either in the early moments of the debate or even before the debate, that someone was already basically feeding them that there was a production team that was ready for that the segment producers are already telling the people on the panel, this is the way we're going to go, even though the debate hasn't started? It just seemed a little too clean to me. I don't know if it seemed that clean to you, but it seemed a little bit too pre-planned to me.
I agree with you only to a point. I think that they were ready for true breaking news mode. Now, let's step back for 1 second. Everything is called breaking news now. There was a time back in my day, because I'm an old man, back in my day where breaking news was a big deal. We would have debates in the newsroom about if something deserved the breaking news banner, breaking news animated graphic. We'd have debates and be like, no, that happened 3 hours ago. It's not breaking news anymore. Of course, nowadays we call something breaking news that happened 3 days ago. Or be like, well, the president is going to make an announcement in the Rose Garden, back when that used to happen. And we know that he's going to make it. So it's not breaking news, but the thing he says is breaking news. So do we call it breaking news? Do we call it a live event? We used to have these debates. Breaking news actually meant something. Now, and the ratings would always spike, when we'd have a breaking news graphic, people flipping channels, and it would always spike. So, of course, what happened? Every single network, all the time, everything is breaking news. So now it doesn't mean anything. So what I wonder is, did they get themselves in the mindset of, let's be prepared to do real breaking news coverage in case news breaks? Because at an event like that, news could break. One of the two candidates could, implode, who knows what. But I think they might have been ready for that. And I think they probably had to clear banners, the words at the bottom of the screen at the highest levels. We've all seen banners that were misspelled or ridiculous. Those not everything goes all the way up to the executive suite. But I would imagine for an event like that, it did. So, or to a very, very trusted executive producer who was given final say, not just like a graphics person, And so I think they were probably ready with the infrastructure, but I don't think that they were necessarily ready for that content. I think they had to really hear it from their sources.
All right. No, that makes a lot of sense. You talked about the suite there. So, this is, the two of us are here. We've been in control rooms for decades. I can't pass by our opportunity. You just kind of alluded to it a little bit. When there's a big live event, a major event like that, what happens is the suits come into the control room. It becomes a crowded control room. The executive producer and team, no matter how much of a well-oiled machine they are during every other day of the year, get basically this unwanted company. These big bosses come in, and I understand during the regime of Jeff Zucker, Zucker himself was typing these 3-line banners when we all know that it's the short New York Post splash kind of banner, 3-4 words that really works. And he was typing these banners because, God forbid, the viewer should think for themselves. It seems like that if the suits were definitely in the control room, I have no doubt about that, but it seems like they either had a clear directive or maybe they did stand back and let a very experienced, as you said, a very experienced executive producer who knows what works have free reign. But that's the impression I get. I wonder if you have the same.
Yeah, listen, someone like Jeff Zucker, and this is not going to defend or criticize Jeff Zucker. He was a producer himself. So if somebody like that is a suit goes in the room, at least he knows what the job is. Sometimes there's suits who got to the executive suite from being in the sales side, and they don't know how you make television live as you do it. So that could be annoying. So that depends on that too. As an executive producer who produced many, many, many breaking news stories in my lifetime and many live events, State of the Union, all that kind of stuff. I did all that kind of stuff. Sometimes if the suits were in there being too loud, you'd have to basically tell them to shut up, and hope that you do your job well enough that 2 hours later they don't fire you for telling them to shut up, and recognize the fact that you're the producer. And television, though it's very, very collaborative, is actually not a democracy. Someone has to make a decision, and you have to make a decision like that. So, and that's the executive producer. So it felt clean enough to me that I think there was probably one person in the chair making the call and not listening to 20 voices behind him or her going, do this, do that, do that. No, do that. Because that's when it gets very messy and crowded. And that's when you see wrong things go on the air because the producer and the director get all confused because you've got people screaming in your ear. It didn't feel that way to me. What surprised me a little bit, and this isn't probably CNN, this is probably the Biden administration, is, or the Biden campaign, I should say, is having Kamala Harris ready to go. Probably either for spin or to take a victory lap, depending on what happened. And I don't think she had the talking points ready with whoever prepped her with Anderson Cooper's interview of her, and he was uber prepared. So the question that I would have is, was Anderson prepared with his producers to go this way or that way, depending on what happened? Because, you don't just get the vice president like that. That was obviously pre-booked, and if not, was as the coverage was happening, as the debate was going on, was Anderson's producer or Anderson's team specifically, as opposed to like the whole panel team going, we're going to rework what we plan to do with Kamala Harris. But either way, they did it.
Yeah, it was kind of a fumble. Again, I'm glad that Anderson Cooper was prepared, but when I saw that she was going to be coming on, because I don't think that they made a big point of her letting us know before the debate. I didn't know until after the debate. Yeah, I didn't know until after the debate that she was going to come on. So that was interesting. Apparently, she was originally supposed to go on MSNBC, but okay, we didn't know she was going to come on until after.
She did do MSNBC, but after CNN.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. And I thought to myself, okay, we have this rare moment where there's a tremendous amount of agreement that Joe Biden just did very, very badly, that it appears that he's having a cognitive issue. Obviously, none of us are doctors, and we can't say that for sure. And I thought to myself, there were some people saying, I don't want to see Kamala Harris. And I thought to myself, are you crazy? Imagine if, when the rumors started swirling about Woodrow Wilson and his debilitating stroke in 1919, if Thomas Marshall, the then vice president, was about to give a national address, had radio or TV been national radio or national TV been a thing back then, it would have been a big deal. So I thought to myself, this could have been a big deal had she come out and said, this is, this, whatever you're thinking, there's nothing, this isn't about answering questions on the fly. She tried to say that, but in other words, she could have just said, everyone is behind Joe Biden 100%, not just the issues, but talked about him personally, because she did, as our previous guest said, she talked a lot about the issues. She didn't go into much detail about how great Joe Biden is. And that was interesting. Last question to you, which I think is something that, we have to use you and your expertise here. It sounds like we're in agreement that CNN comported itself pretty well last night. And I want to talk about how extraordinary that is, because this was an event and an evening that objectively you have to say was pretty good for the Trump people and pretty bad for, let's say it was good for the right and bad for the left. Make change tomorrow. I get it. I understand that we're not here to make partisan cheerleading here. But most people believe objectively that this was a win for the right and a loss for the left. And despite that, CNN comported itself pretty well. Now, if we have a scenario where Donald Trump wins the presidential election, is the debate coverage that CNN did an example of, or an inkling that maybe the mainstream news media may be able to comport themselves decently, even if we have Trump part 2?
Well, that's a loaded question, but I think there's so many layers to that question.
Sure. Take them one at a time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, as far as who won, because I think that will affect what happens in the future. The thing we left out is that CNN also did a pretty quick piece that I saw it this morning, because afterwards I did flip a little channel because I want to see what MSNBC and Fox were doing. So I'm not sure exactly when it ran, but they TikTok through every single time Trump, I'm just going to say it, lied. Every time he said something that was factually incorrect. And there are way more of those than Biden, way more. And they did TikTok through all of that. So the question I would have is, does that end up sticking a few days from now? And I'm not going to predict the future. So I think future coverage will also depend on the overall reaction to what happened. Because as much as they showed Biden in the split screen not looking, present and forceful, they also showed Trump saying things that weren't true quite often without correcting that. So one could argue that they're going to try to make more of an effort in the future to do fact checking. And Trump is not known for sticking to facts. So it could go that way. As far as like pure objectivity goes, back in the day, before MSNBC and Fox existed, before BBC was 24 hours on television, it was only on radio, when CNN was really the only game in town, CNN could be quite boring. And I admit that. It could be quite boring. And that used to drive me crazy at how boring we were. But we gave you a real good sense of what was going on in the world. I always felt like we were kind of giving you a list of what was happening. Not necessarily telling you what it meant, but therefore we stayed away from editorializing. But we gave you a list, unless we completely editorialized and it was a show like Crossfire, which was obviously very clearly partisan. From the left, I'm so-and-so. From the right, I'm so-and-so. It was in the title of the show, basically. So, or the opening of it. So is there maybe a desire to be more centrist, more in the middle? I mean, I think we're seeing that in some of, I'm talking on behalf of the viewer, I think we're seeing that in some of the primaries are already happening. Some of the more extreme candidates on both the far right and the far left are not doing as well. Some are even losing. So this is America, right? All these businesses, as altruistic as we want to be, and some of us, I like to think, do things because it's the right thing to do. But we all work for companies that have to make money, including media companies. And if there is enough desire among the American people for a media company to really play it straight down the middle, someone will do that. And I think CNN, it's in its DNA to want to do that. I really do. I think even though there's a lot of new people there, it's in the DNA of CNN to want to do that. Whereas it's not in the DNA of Fox or MSNBC to do that. And so I'm sort of not directly answering your question, but I kind of am, because I think there's too many nuances and layers to see what's going to happen. Now, if Biden were to win a second term and be feeble, I think the media would jump on that. If Trump were to win a second term, I guess we call it that. If Trump were to win a second term and just be constantly, saying things that weren't true, then I think that there would be a desire to jump on that as well. The question then becomes, to the next layer, the next nuance is, how do you do that? Do you do it in a way that feels objective, or you do it in a way that feels partisan? Right. And it's one of those things like the old joke of the definition of pornography. I know it when I see it, but I can't define it. I mean, being critical of a political candidate it's hard to really put into words what is a partisan way to do it and what's an objective way to do it. But you know it when you see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a lot to go here, but I mean, my conclusion, and we thank Peter Tedeschi for joining us. My conclusion would be that CNN did carve itself out an opportunity for itself for the future, something that I would never have guessed before that debate Thursday night. Whether I wouldn't put money on them actually taking that path, but I think that they, at least somebody at CNN must have seen a viable path for themselves for the future based on the way they did that debate. And hopefully they can learn from it. Again, it wasn't perfect. There were a lot of things I would have done differently. There are a lot of questions I would have asked differently, but I just can't believe that. I mean, I'm just not going to go on here and not say how good a job they did. They did a good job. I have nothing invested in saying they had a good job. I know you don't either, but they did. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Thank everyone else for joining us on this edition of The Analyst. This is what you get here. You're not getting cheerleading for one candidate or bashing another. We're talking about messaging. We're talking about media. What's the best way to get this information out, and who did well and who didn't do well. Just like you were doing a sports pregame NFL or postgame show. Sure, we're rooting for some of these players. We admit that, but we can still tell you if they fumbled or scored a touchdown. So until next time, thank you for joining us. This is The Analyst with Jake Novak. Keep watching.